Hi, welcome back to Project Stargate. We're here again with Pam Nance, and this is part two of a special edition of Project Stargate. Pam, we were talking about relativity and quantum physics and whatnot. Please continue.
Okay, so through my investigations into the paranormal, I was led to study quantum theory, and as a result, I combined the paranormal evidence with some of the what seemed to be interstellar and interdimensional communication and quantum theory into PowerPoint presentations. Because at that point in time, I guess it was around 2011, my partner and I, we were being invited to present at various conferences and for institutions up and down the East Coast. We presented to the Ryan Research Center at Duke University, um, as well as DragonCon in Atlanta, Georgia.
Really?
We presented there 3 years in a row as part of the paranormal track. Um, and for those of you who aren't familiar with DragonCon, that's the East Coast version of Comic Con. It's a 3 day
Yes.
event that brings in tens of thousands of people. It's a lot of cosplay. They have, science fiction stars there. I've seen some of the Star Trek people there, and
hmm
um,
Yeah, I saw
and
Brent Spiner there many years ago. I saw Brent Spiner and Jonathan Frakes. And Patrick Stewart was there somewhere. I never got to see him, but I've been down there they usually have it down there at the Marriott Marquis and downtown Atlanta. It's
yeah,
fun.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. Um, so in 2013, we first presented our paranormal and quantum theory presentation. And what was great about that year, Stanton Friedman was also in attendance. He had been invited to present about Roswell. And for your listeners who aren't familiar with Stanton, he he's passed away. He's been deceased for a couple of years now, but Stanton was one of the leaders in the field of ufology, particularly with the Roswell incident in 1947.
That he certainly
Um,
was.
yeah, it had sort of died off, and he brought it back to the forefront in the early 70s through just intensive research, interviewing witnesses and family members of the people who had experienced the actual Roswell event, and subsequently wrote books about it and became very well known in the field of ufology. So Stanton was also presenting at DragonCon that year, and I recognized him and invited him to sit in on my presentation, and he did. And he was very impressed with the scientific approach to the paranormal. And he was also pretty blown away by the audio that we presented, the electronic voice phenomena of the, portal communications and the dimensional stuff. And afterwards, he um, said that he would like to introduce me to Kathleen Martin, a friend of his. And Kathleen is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, the mixed race couple who were abducted in the early 60s. And she's also pretty much a lifetime member of MUFON for at least 30 years, if not longer, and was also the director of the Experiencer research team for a number of years. And Kathy's written numerous books and co-authored with Stanton. But he thought that it would be nice for me to meet Kathy, and so he made that introduction. And over the period of about 2 years, Kathy and I communicated by phone and by email. And she was very interested in the paranormal work, but also the other communication that was coming through. And in 2015, she suggested that my partner and I meet up with she and Denise Stoner at Denise's home, because Denise had been having some paranormal activity occur in her home, and she had a lot of questions about who the spirits were. And so Kathy recommended that we come down and do an investigation. And so in June, I think it was about June 20th of 2015, we traveled down to Denise's home, did about a 3-hour investigation, and retrieved a lot of beneficial information. We identified the 2 spirits that were primarily active within the home. There were, disembodied voices and moving furniture and that kind of thing, and found out that it was a woman who was attached to a table that Denise had either bought or inherited. I can't remember. And the other spirit was her father-in-law, who was a deceased physician. And so she was very happy, to get that information. But at the end of that meeting, Kathleen said, well, since you have such ability in getting these communications that come through, she said it would be really interesting for you to go to an area where there's been a known UFO abduction and UFO activity, to see if your investigative methodology would work in communicating with alien presence. And so she referred us to a man that lives in the eastern part of North Carolina near the Cape Fear River. This man and his son had an abduction experience in 2007 by the Cape Fear River. And in the 8 years between 2007 and 2015, when I traveled there, they had numerous encounters on their home property, which is about 2 or 3 miles from the Cape Fear River. So much activity that people like Colonel John Alexander had been there, Grant Cameron, James Simivan, who's now part of To the Stars Academy, retired CIA. So a lot of interest in that property and the activity. So we traveled there on June 27th, 2015, and arrived in the early afternoon, met the man and his family, very nice family, well-grounded, religious-based. His probably 80-year-old mother lived next door, met her, spent the day, hearing about the activity that had occurred on the property, and also hearing about the abduction experience from 2007. And we walked the property. We were shown some of the areas where they had actually encountered activity. And in particular, one tree, there was a catalpa tree in the backyard, about a 40-foot tall catalpa tree. And this tree was kind of the center of some activity. One prominent piece of activity was the tree just spontaneously bursting into flame.
Wow.
And they would attempt to put it out. They have videos of them hosing it down. It appears, the fire would go out and then it would burst into flame again. And this went on for some time, this tree just spontaneously bursting into flame. But it never killed the tree. That's what was so interesting. When we saw it, you could clearly see one side just completely burned, but the tree was alive, full of leaves, living. So we decided that would be a great place to conduct the investigation that night, was underneath that tree, since it seemed to be, such a prime location for activity. We had planned to go out around 7, not before dark. But a huge thunderstorm pushed through, and we weren't able to go out until around 10 that evening. But the benefit there was that it cleared out the air. We had a beautiful starlit night, about a 3/4 moon. So it turned out to be a really pleasant evening. We went out, we set up our video camera with night vision, behind the tree, about 15 feet behind the tree, and angled it in such a way that we had a nice view where if anything happened in or around that tree, we would capture it on the video camera. So that's the first thing we set up. And then later, we subsequently ended up on the other side of the tree, under the tree, to actually conduct the investigation with our spirit boxes and digital recorders and 35 millimeter cameras. So this first session in setting up the camera, we were talking to the property owner and his wife, just about various things and people that we knew in common. And my partner noticed the battery was starting to die, even though it had been fully charged. And
Very typical.
you know how that goes.
Yes.
You go out with fully charged equipment and suddenly it's drained or the batteries are dead. So she could see that this battery's starting to wane. So she returned to the house, got a fresh battery. So at that point, the camera had run for about 9 minutes. And the battery was not yet dead, so she did not change it out. So we walked away from the video camera, positioned ourselves under the tree, and it ended up being myself, my partner, and the property owner. The rest of the family returned to the house. So at this point, it's about 10 o'clock. We had already, as we walked away from the video camera, we started our spirit box. So we began asking questions as we normally would during a paranormal investigation. Who's here? Who wants to talk to us? Can you tell us your name? Those kinds of questions. And immediately we began receiving responses that indicated these weren't voices coming through from any kind of historic timeline. They sounded interstellar or interdimensional. And the reason I say that, for several years, we'd been picking up the name of a planet called Adela. They told us that they were from Adela. So we started hearing Adela come through. And we knew we were talking then to interstellar communication. Pretty soon, these voices started telling us to look at the moon. And we had already noticed a really bright light to the left of the moon. And we had discussed, is that a star? It's awfully bright to be a star. We could see the surrounding stars off in the distance, but this was a really bright light to the left of the moon. And these voices are coming through. I'm at the moon. I'm to the left of the moon. We're circling. We're behind the moon. We're back. We're above you. Those kinds of things. So, of course, we ask additional questions and we're staring at this bright light and we're talking about, is it a star or is it something else? And then the next thing I know, the three of us were standing there. We're shoulder to shoulder. I feel really, really sick, like really sick on my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm dizzy. And I look at my partner and the property owner, and they're just kind of standing there swaying. And I said, I don't feel well. And they're like, neither do we. And then I realized I no longer have my equipment in my hands. And I tell my partner, where's our equipment? And she didn't have her equipment. And never in our investigative careers have we laid our equipment down. That would be counterintuitive to the whole purpose of being there. Our equipment's our main means of communication. Why would we not have it? So I turned and looked behind me. The equipment is on the ground, and the ground's still wet from the rain, and it's turned off. Well, we would have never laid our equipment on the wet ground, and we would not have turned it off in the middle of an investigation. That just didn't make any sense.
Right.
But we felt so weird and just kind of dazed and out of it, and
Mhm.
really couldn't explain why we didn't have our equipment any longer.
That's very similar to some experiences I've had, Pam. I remember, and I told you about a little bit about this earlier, but one incident of missing time I experienced with my grandparents. Afterwards, I remember feeling very sick to my stomach. Another quick comment I wanted to make: you were talking about the batteries dying in your camera and your equipment. One thing I have noticed, there's a common thread with both UFO, close encounters, and other types of paranormal activity. So, poltergeists and things that involve PK and whatnot. One common thread I've seen very consistently is electronic interference.
Hmm.
It's a very common thread, and so many times do I hear about vehicles just cutting off,
Right.
uh, cameras die, cell phones cutting off. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted to make that comment real quick. I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's very common, and that's interesting that you had the same sick feeling, after your encounter. And I've heard that reported from other people, that I've read about or listened to in presentations that they didn't feel well either. Um, and one thing that we did notice was that the bright light we had seen previously was no longer there. Not only was our equipment not in our hands, but the bright light was gone. Um, and what I failed to mention earlier, once we positioned ourselves under the tree and began the investigation, my partner looked back and realized the battery on the video camera had gone completely dead. So she had changed out the battery, put a fresh battery in, and that camera, that segment of the video, I think I said it ran 9 minutes total. So what we did notice when we were gathering up our equipment off the ground, she went around to get the video camera. The camera was still recording, even though the other equipment had been turned off. The video camera was still recording. So she shut that down, gathered it up. We walk into the property owner's house through the back door, and his wife comes running out of the bedroom. She's in her nightgown. She's kind of frantic because she hasn't been able to find us. She wanted to know, where have you been? And we were like, we were out back under the tree. She said, no, I've been looking for you. You were not out back. And, we were trying to convince her, yes, we were. We were on the other side of the tree. And she said, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And that just blew our minds because we went out at 10. It felt like we'd only been out there for a short period of time. And she's telling us it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So at that point, all I can think about is, gee, I've got to drive 3 hours back home, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning. This is not good. I didn't question, how did it become 1 o'clock in the morning? I just needed some coffee, to wake up and get myself together so I could get home safely. So we drank a bunch of coffee, loaded our equipment, got in the car, went maybe about a mile away from that location out to a little 4-lane highway that was going to lead us back to the main interstate. And we look over, and above this little shopping center, we see a huge bright light just right above the treetops, shooting from what I would say would be south to north. Just incredibly bright and, brilliant, just zoom. And we could only think shooting star, but, clearly shooting stars are not just right above the treetop. And it would have, gone into the ground, but this thing just shot off to the north. But again, we were still kind of dazed from the whole event, and we barely talked on the way home. This 3-hour drive, which was very unusual for us. Usually we're very chatty after an investigation.
Right.
You're all psyched and pumped up, and we
Sure.
barely spoke. Got here to the house, and it was, probably close to 5 o'clock in the morning. My partner had to drive back to Georgia, so we grabbed a few hours sleep. She got on the road, and I started reviewing my audio. So I'm listening to this audio. So we go out at 10. I figure I've got a ton of audio to listen to, like 3 hours. I only had an hour and 15 minutes of audio, and my audio stopped. So I'm thinking, okay, we went out at 10. That would take us to 11:15. What did we do for an hour and 45 minutes? So I called my partner on her cell phone, and I said, as soon as you get home, review the video camera and listen to your audio, because I'm missing an hour and 45 minutes of audio. Something happened. But what was really strange, at the end of that hour and 15 minutes of audio, you can hear my partner say to someone, as though she's being instructed, so you want us to turn our equipment off? And I say, that sounds like a good idea. Let's turn our equipment off. And neither of us have any memory of saying that.
That's really strange.
And why would we say that?
Right.
Why would we turn our equipment off? We had no recall of saying that. And I mentioned that to her when I called her. I said, and get this, we're talking about turning our equipment off. So she got home. She immediately looked at the video, and she said, something really strange happened to us. She said, I'm seeing this entity that I can't describe that's in the tree in that first 9 minutes. And she said, there's also some audio there. And, and then with the fresh battery, the video camera had continued to run during the missing time event, the hour and 45 minutes. It ran for about close to that much time. So she said, I'm picking up some really crazy audio from the video camera that kind of indicates we might have had an abduction. And so over the next week, we did just this intensive review of the audio and the video, and realized, we had some kind of event here. We had some kind of contact. But we were not sure what happened, and it caused a lot of anxiety. And that tends to happen, with people who have these kinds of missing time events. You can't remember, or you're just remembering little bits and pieces. And, it's very frustrating and stressful. And I remember just having a lot of anxiety when I would wake up in the morning. I would have little glitches of memory, but not full memory. And so over time, we reached out, of course, to Kathleen and to Stanton Friedman, and shared the video with them, and also shared it with an individual that works for NASA. And Kathleen has done just a remarkable job in analyzing the video frame by frame.
She is a very good investigator. She's an amazing investigator. So are you. Absolutely.
Yeah, she pulled out these images just incredibly. And what we found was that when we first went out at 10 o'clock and set up that video camera, there was already a being sitting up in that tree that we didn't see. But he appears to be, from what we can tell by, estimating the size of the tree, which was about 40 feet tall, the distance of the camera back from the tree, he appears to be about 6 feet tall. and he's sitting up in that catalpa tree. He's dressed in what appears to be like a black bodysuit. You can see his arms sort of kicked out at the sides, the silhouette of, his waist and his legs going down. But then this brightly lit, creamy colored head that isn't human. And he appears to have these appendages on either side of his head. We're not sure if it's part of some type of helmet or if they're actually parts of his anatomy. But there also appears to be some type of object. If you're looking straight at him, it would be on the left forward facing view, like a round object that maybe is some type of night vision or some type of instrument that's attached to the side of his head. And then down below him, coming up into frame at the bottom of the video, you see this little image start to appear. And if you were looking at a clock, it would be around 5 o'clock. He first comes into frame, and he comes across the screen, coming upwards, and ends up behind the larger beam. And if you just look at this video, it's very fast. But the images that Kathleen managed to pull out are quite amazing. It shows this little guy who's a very energetic being that clearly materializes, when he first comes into frame and forms into this fully formed being that comes up behind the larger being. Then he turns into an orb, a light orb, shoots out of frame and into a blue portal. Turns into a little pinprick of light into this portal of blue light. So these two beings were there at the very beginning, yet we didn't miss the time until later in the evening. But what's interesting about that video where the beings are recorded, there's actual audio. So you hear us talking to the property owners for the first 7 minutes and 45 seconds. And then you hear us start to walk away to position ourselves under the catalpa tree to start the investigation. So you hear me turn my spirit box on, and we're talking and we're walking away. Then you hear what sounds like a loud roar, almost like you would imagine a craft, the sound of a craft coming down. And there's a robotic voice that says, "Step out." Sounds like a robot.
Wow.
And then I say, "The craft has landed." And my partner says, "Oh crap, we're back." And we're not happy about being back. We say, things I won't repeat, on video, but we're really not happy about being brought back. And I say, "Look, there are people looking out the windows. Where are the windows, you think?" And that'll make sense later. But so we're talking about being brought back. We see, I say, the craft has landed. They're telling us to step out, and we're not happy. But at the same time, you can hear us under the catalpa tree conducting the investigation.
Wow.
So they have overlapped us in time and space. And we're still trying to figure that part out.
Can I stop you there for just a second?
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. So you're on board a craft of some sort, or in another location, one or the other. And when they cut you guys loose, so to speak, you were released in another area or another period of time previous to when you should have been. Is
Right.
that correct?
That's correct.
And you heard yourself, Kathleen, and who else was it?
Kathleen wasn't there.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
Kathleen just introduced me to the property owner.
Oh, okay. I
It was
apologize.
myself and my investigative partner and the property owner.
So the
Uh,
three of you were taken.
well, we're not sure about the property owner because we never hear his voice. It's just Ashley and I talking about being brought back, and I don't recall seeing him on board the craft. I really don't recall seeing Ashley on the craft, but she recalls seeing me through regression and recall. Um, but yeah, they brought us back into an earlier timeline. And, people have asked me, well, why would they do that? And I think it's, one of two reasons. Perhaps they wanted to show us what they're capable of doing and to make us realize that something happened to you that night and we want to get your attention. So investigate this, this audio and this video. Or it has something to do with the space-time continuum that, traveling interdimensionally or interstellar travel, if we're going light years, that's just maybe a circumstance of this interstellar travel.
Or maybe gravity.
Yeah. But, if they're smart enough to get here, I think they'd be smart enough to bring us back in any timeline that they would want to. So I almost think it was a way for them to really get our attention and say, hey, this is what we can do. We're capable of doing this.
Or it could have been an accident.
Maybe. I don't know. We're still trying to figure that out 6 years later. We've got the audio pretty clarified and pulled out. That's been the difficult part is, enhancing it enough that we can tell, okay, that's me over there talking, but that's me here talking about being brought back. But then the crazy thing, the hour and some odd minutes that we have on the video camera audio after we were taken indicates that we're being abducted. They even say, we're abductors. Would you like to know what we left as? Which that kind of creeps me out. What do you mean, what we left as? But they're saying we're abductors.
That's like a UFO appearing above you and it has UFO and neon lights written on it.
Right. But they're saying, we see them, we're on them. Let's take them, bring them aboard, get them up to the craft first. I mean, just one piece of audio after another. I have some of it posted on my website. There's the photographic evidence and some of the audio evidence. And I plan to post more, as I go through it and put together videos. But after that event, I did spontaneously start to recall some of that night. And I also was seeing an acupuncturist, and he did a lot of needle, like third eye needle work. He would put a needle into my third eye. And so that brought memories forward. And in 2019, the spring of 2019, Kathleen Martin regressed me and brought additional memories. And I also participated in a research study funded by the Department of Defense called HIRAM, and that's high resonance encephalographic mirroring. And it balances the two hemispheres of the brain to help with high blood pressure, PTSD, those kinds of things, because I was kind of having some of that from not having full recall of what happened that night. it's very stress inducing. You know
Yes, it is.
something happened and you're getting these little glimpses, but you don't have a full picture. So some information came through during the Hiram session. So over time, I've got a really good picture of what occurred. And my partner was also regressed by Kathleen. Um, so what between the two of us, what happened was that when they're telling us to turn off the equipment, that's when they took us. Um, and we were absorbed onto the craft with this brilliant blue light. Um, and once we were on board the craft, we were separated. And I met 4 individuals, 2 males and 2 females. Well, one of the males and one of the females were the same 2 that came to me in my bedroom when I was a 10-year-old child that balanced my karma. They were the 2 of the same. And the other 2 individuals I did not remember meeting before. But they communicated telepathically. And when I boarded the craft, they placed a black vest on me, like a Velcro, almost like a thunder shirt that you would put on an animal to calm them down. But it was also to protect me from this plasma wall that was visible within the craft. And that's the propulsion system that I was seeing. So the vest was calming and protective. But this plasma wall was just that same beautiful blue color that shot out of the craft that took us on board. And it's the same blue that's on that little being that you can see on my website in the video, that brilliant blue energy pack that he has on the front.
Yes, I remember seeing that.
That same color blue and the same color blue of the portal that he shot into. So the blue seems to be a theme, but the plasma wall was like ran from the top of the craft to the bottom, and it looked sort of like water, but it wasn't. And within that, at the bottom, there was a little bit of green and white that would come in. And when those colors came in, that meant the ship was being energized. And they're communicating these things to me telepathically, that this water wall or plasma wall is the propulsion for the ship. And embedded within that plasma wall was a matrix of numbers. And I could see those numbers. And they're in my life all the time.
That's weird. I'm having some kind of a glitch here. It's never done this before. My
Yeah.
camera keeps going in and out. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it just went completely dead for a second. I
Yeah.
apologize. Go ahead.
That's okay. That happens a lot of times when I do these interviews.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it happened the last time I interviewed. It was weird. So they communicated that they had been on planet Earth 200,000 years ago. And they periodically come back to check on the progress of the planet and the consciousness of humankind, and that they've known me throughout all my lifetimes on Earth. And they came here initially 200,000 years ago because their planet could no longer sustain them. And they stopped here for a short period of time, but became interested in the inhabitants of this planet. But they moved on, and they're now located in Alpha Centauri, is where these beings originate from. And they're very humanoid. The 4 that I encountered that night looked like the ones I described when I was 10, chiseled features, the light brown hair. The men that night had their hair pulled back like in a ponytail. The women had shoulder length or below the shoulder hair, bangs. Um, very beautiful people with those big eyes. The men on that craft were dressed in just these beautiful royal blue bodysuits. And they had a chevron emblem on the left side of the chest, but one had the chevron with two bars, and he was the leader. That's what I gathered just from the way he spoke and interacted. The women were in like these abalone, beautiful iridescent bodysuits. But they come periodically to this part of our galaxy to probe nebulae for information and to also check in on our solar system and our planet. And this was pretty wild, they materialized a glass smart pad, and the lead male held that in his hands, and it was sheer glass, but then images started to appear. And what he showed me was the sun, and its vibrations are increasing. Its energies pushing out further into our solar system. And that's pushing our planets further out into the galaxy. And as this energy increases, so does our mass, and matter changes, vibration changes, and electron energy changes as we're being pushed further out into the galaxy. And the bottom line is that humankind has got to raise their consciousness in order to survive these planetary changes that are occurring because of the sun's vibration changing. It's all changing. And they pretty much said that, time's up. We need to get it right. And, it's a matter of raising our collective vibration to a higher level of consciousness. And that means caring for our planet and for each other and for the animals, and just raising our awareness that, there's something much bigger than we are. And it goes beyond our materialistic daily lives, that we've got to wake up. And I don't know if you or the viewers are familiar with the Schumann resonance, but that's the vibration of our planet. It was identified by a scientist with the name Schumann in the early 60s. And it's been a constant, about a 7 on the scale of resonance up until just a few years ago. And now it's in the upper 20s. So the vibration of planet Earth has gone from a 7 to like a 28 in the past 3 or 4 years. So that tells me that there's something occurring vibrationally, energetically, and that affects us as energetic beings.
Wow, that's amazing. When you, how many you've had, how many, if you had to take a guess on how many times you've had CE4s, how many do you think you've had? I mean, just roundabout. I mean, how typical has it been in your life?
It's been so typical. I didn't even touch on the experiences I feel that I've had living in this home for 40 years that were UFO related.
Would you like to talk about them for another 20 or 30 minutes in another short segment?
Sure, I could do that.
Why don't we take a short break, and when we come back, let's talk about that for another 20 or 30 minutes and wrap this up in part three.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right.
All right.
All right. This is Pam Nance on a special edition of Project Stargate. We'll be right back.